Look, I teased the janitor investor. The executives laughed when I walked into the shareholders meeting. You really think your pathetic $5,000 investment gives you a voice here? The CFO sneered as others chuckled. I smiled politely and took my CT in the back row. When the CEO finally arrived, he pointed at me and met the anonymous buyer who now owns 51% of our company. I'd spent 15 years cleaning the offices of Vertex Technologies, watching from the shadows as the company grew from a scrappy startup into a $200 million tech powerhouse. Every night, I'd empty their trash bins, vacuum their plush carpets, and wipe down the glass conference tables where million-dollar decisions were made. To them, I was invisible. Just Manuel Reyes, the night janitor who barely spoke English. What they didn't know was that I spoke 5 languages fluently, held an MBA from an overseas university, and had been investing nearly every penny of my modest salary into their company stock since the day they went public. It wasn't that I was hiding my background deliberately, it was simply that no one had ever bothered to ask. In their world, a janitor was just a janitor, a function, not a person with dreams, intelligence, or ambition. My investment strategy had been simple. Live frugally, save aggressively, and invest consistently in a company whose inner workings I understood better than almost anyone. While executives came and went, I remained observing patterns, listening to late-night conversations people had when they thought no one was around, and reading discarded documents that revealed the company's true health beyond the polished quarterly reports. My first stock purchase had indeed been modest, just $5,000, nearly all my savings at the time. But year after year, I increased my position, especially when I knew the stock was undervalued. During the financial crisis of 2008, when panic selling drove Vertex's stock to record lows, I took out a second mortgage on my small home and invested everything. The executives were buying vacation homes. I was buying their company piece by quiet piece. By 2023, Vertex Technologies had reached a critical juncture. Their groundbreaking security software had captured significant market share, but mismanagement and excessive executive compensation had eroded profits. The founding CEO had retired, replaced by Elliot Warner, a slick salesman with a Harvard MBA and expensive tastes, but limited technical understanding of the company's products. Under Warner's leadership, the focus shifted from innovation to cost-cutting. Talented developers were laid off while the executive team expanded. The company's stock had stagnated for 3 years despite the booming tech market. Longtime employees whispered about their concerns, but publicly, Warner projected unwavering confidence. I watched it all unfold as I emptied his trash can each night, finding discarded presentations about declining product quality and growing customer complaints. I saw the emails he printed and then discarded about competitor advances that threatened Vertex's market position. And most tellingly, I noticed how the executives were quietly selling their personal stock holdings while telling employees and shareholders to keep faith. Something needed to change, but as a seemingly powerless janitor, what could I do? The answer came when I learned of a vulnerability few others recognize: the company's ownership structure. Vertex's founding CEO had maintained a 40% ownership stake kept in a family trust. Upon his retirement, rumors circulated that the shares would be sold to provide for his comfortable retirement. The board, loyal to Warner, planned to have the company buy back these shares gradually to prevent any outsider from gaining significant influence. What they didn't know was that I had established a relationship with the founder years earlier. On quiet nights when he worked late, we'd occasionally chat, first about simple things, then gradually about our families, our backgrounds, and eventually the company itself. I never revealed the extent of my stock holdings, but he came to know me as more than just the janitor. When he decided to sell his shares, he contacted me discreetly. "Manuel," he said during our phone call, "I've watched Warner and his team run my company into the ground. The board won't stand up to him. I need a buyer who cares about Vertex's future, not just its quarterly profits." I took a deep breath. "What if I found that buyer?" He chuckled. "That would be quite something. The shares are valued at $87 million at current market price. And if someone could meet that price, there was a pause. Manuel, are you saying what I think you're saying? Let me make some calls, I replied. What the founder didn't know was that over 15 years, my initial investment had grown substantially. Additionally, I had helped several family members and friends from my community invest in Vertex based on my insights. Collectively, our holdings had reached nearly 20% of the company. With the founder's 40%, we could take control. I established an investment vehicle, Sierra Vista Partners, and pulled resources from my network. A sympathetic bank provided financing for the remainder secured against the very shares we were purchasing. Within 30 days, the deal was complete. Sierra Vista Partners acquired the founder's entire stake, giving us effective control of Vertex Technologies. No announcement was made. No regulatory filings were required yet due to the structure of the transaction. The board and Warner remained oblivious that the company's ownership had fundamentally changed, which brings me to the shareholders meeting that would change everything. As a shareholder, I had every right to attend the annual meeting, though I'd never exercised that right before. I registered under my own name, Manuel Reyes, and arrived wearing my only suit purchased specifically for this occasion. The executives' reaction when they saw me enter the hotel ballroom was immediate and visceral. Warner's smile froze on his face as he nudged his CFO, Gerald Thompson. "What's the janitor doing here?" I overheard Thompson whisper as I walked past. Warner forced a smile. "Probably owns 10 shares. Everyone's an investor these days." I took a seat in the back row and observed quietly as shareholders filtered in. A few long-term investors nodded politely in my direction, recognizing me from my years of service in the building, but most ignored me entirely. As the meeting was about to begin, Thompson approached me, his expensive cologne arriving seconds before he did. "Mr. Reyes, isn't it?" he said with a condescending smile. "I didn't realize you were a shareholder for 15 years, I replied simply. He raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's commendable. Small investors are the backbone of American capitalism, aren't they? How many shares do you own, if you don't mind my asking?" "Enough to be here," I answered. His smile tightened. "Of course. Well, enjoy the meeting. But you might find some of the discussion a bit." He searched for the right word, technical. As he walked away, I heard him mutter to another executive, "Look, it's the janitor investor. Probably scraped together enough for a few shares." The boardroom erupted in quiet laughter. I maintained my composure, focused on what was about to unfold. Warner called the meeting to order with his typical flourish, presenting a rosy picture of the company's position despite mediocre financial results. He outlined expansion plans that would require significant capital investment and proposed a new executive compensation package that would substantially increase his own pay despite the stagnant stock price. During the question period, a few institutional investors raised concerns about declining margins and increasing customer churn, which Warner dismissed with practice corporate speak about transitional phases and strategic repositioning. When no one else raised their hand, I did. The room fell silent as Warner reluctantly acknowledged me. "Yes, Mr. In the back Reyes," I supplied, Manuel Reyes. I could see Warner struggling to maintain his professional demeanor. "Yes, Mr. Reyes. Your question?" The company has spent $42 million on executive compensation over the past 2 years of reducing R&D spending by nearly 30%. During the same period, our main competitor has doubled their development budget and released 2 major product updates to R1. Could you explain how this strategy supports long-term shareholder value? The precision of my question and the data it contained created a palpable tension in the room. Warner hadn't expected this level of insight from the night janitor. "Well," he stammered slightly, "executive talent is our most valuable asset, and retention requires competitive compensation. As for R&D, we focus on efficiency rather than raw spending numbers. Yet customer satisfaction scores have dropped from 92% to 76% in 18 months, I continued. And the average tenure of software engineers has declined from 4 years to 17 months. Werner's face darkened. Mr. Reyes, with all due respect, these complex business decisions might be difficult to fully appreciate without a background in corporate management. Rest assured the board and executive team are acting in shareholders' best interests. Thompson, unable to contain himself, added loudly. Perhaps Mr. Ray should focus on his own job, rather than second-guessing executives with decades of experience and advanced degrees. How many shares did you say you owned, sir? 5? Pen? A few executives chuckled, though most shareholders looked uncomfortable at the naked condescension. I remained calm. I believe in investing in what you know, Mr. Thompson. And after 15 years of working in your offices, I know Vertex Technologies quite well. Before Thompson could respond, the doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and a woman in a crisp business suit entered, followed by 4 men carrying document boxes. She walked confidently to the front of the room and handed Warner an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. Irritation cleared in his voice at the interruption. "Regulatory filing," she replied loud enough for everyone to hear. Sierra Vista Partners has acquired 40% of Vertex Technologies' outstanding shares from the founders' family trusts. Combined with their existing holdings, they now control 58.7% of the company. Warner's face went pale. "That's impossible. The board has first right of refusal on the founders' shares. This transaction cannot be valid." The board's right of first refusal expired 60 days after the initial offer. The woman who I knew was Patricia Alvarez, one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the city, continued. "That deadline passed 2 weeks ago. The transaction is complete and legally binding." Murmurs spread through the room as shareholders tried to process this dramatic development. Warner looked like he might be ill. Who is Sierra Vista Partners?" he finally managed. Miss Alvarez smiled slightly. "Their managing partner is present and would like to address the shareholders." All eyes scanned the room, expecting someone to stand up from among the institutional investors, or perhaps for someone new to enter dramatically. Instead, I stood up quietly from my seat in the back row. "I am Manuel Reyes, managing partner of Sierra Vista Partners, and the new majority shareholder of Vertex Technologies." The silence that followed was absolute. Warner's mouth literally hung open. Thompson looked like he'd been struck. Several other executives who had laughed at me earlier stared in undisguised shock. I walked calmly to the front of the room. "Thank you, Miss Alvarez, and thank you, Mr. Warner, for chairing the meeting until now. As the representative of the majority shareholder, I'll be taking over." This is preposterous," Warner sputtered. "You're the janitor." I smiled. I was the janitor. I'm also an MBA graduate, a long-term investor, and now the controlling shareholder of this company. Turning to address the room, I continued. "For 15 years, I've watched this company grow from within. I've seen its strengths and its weaknesses from a perspective few others could. I've witnessed brilliant innovations dismissed because they came from lower-level employees. I've seen wasteful spending justified as executive necessity." I gestured to the document boxes Miss Alvarez's team had brought in. "These contain our detailed analysis of Vertex's current position and our plan to restore its competitive edge and shareholder value. Key elements include refocusing on R&D, implementing a more equitable compensation structure, and creating pathways for internal talent development." The institutional investors were already flipping through copies of the plan that were being distributed. Several were nodding with approval at what they read. As my first act as majority shareholder, I continued. I moved for the immediate restructuring of the board of directors and executive team. A hand went up. Martin Klein from Perimeter Capital, one of our largest institutional investors. "Mr. Reyes, while this is certainly unexpected, your analysis is quite thorough." Perimeter Capital seconds the motion. Warner, finally recovering his voice, interjected frantically. "This is a hostile takeover. You can't just walk in here and it's not hostile, Mr. Warner." I corrected him calmly. "It's capitalism. The very system you've explained to shareholders for years when justifying your compensation packages and cost-cutting measures. The majority shareholder is exercising its rights, Thompson, still processing his new reality, hissed, "You tricked us. You pretended to be just a janitor all these years." I turned to face him directly. "I never pretended to be anything, Mr. Thompson. I was a janitor. I did my job with pride and dignity. You and others simply decided that meant I couldn't be anything else. Couldn't be educated, couldn't be ambitious, couldn't be an investor. That was your mistake, not my deception." The vote to restructure the board passed overwhelmingly. Warner Thompson and 3 other executives were removed from their positions effective immediately. I appointed an interim CEO, Dr. Sophia Chen, our brilliant but overlooked head of product development, who had been considering leaving for a competitor. As the meeting concluded and shell-shocked executives filed out, many shareholders came forward to introduce themselves. Some admitted they'd seen me for years, but never said hello. Others expressed enthusiasm for the new direction outlined in our plan. Warner was the last to leave, stopping in front of me with a mix of anger and bewilderment. 15 years, he said. You cleaned my office for 15 years without saying a word about any of this. I spoke up many times, Mr. Warner, I replied. I submitted suggestions to the employee portal. I raised concerns during town halls. Once I even sent a detailed analysis of our product vulnerabilities compared to competitors. You just never listened because of who you thought I was. He shook his head and walked out without another word. Later that evening, I returned to the Vertex offices not to clean, but to meet with the intern leadership team. As I walked through the familiar hallways now as the majority owner rather than the night janitor, employees stopped and stared. News had spread quickly. Maria from accounting, who had always smiled and said hello when others didn't, approached tentatively. Mr. Reyes, is it true? I smiled. Please, it's still Manuel. But you own the company now? Sierra Vista Partners does, I clarified. It represents investments from many people who believe in Vertex's potential, including several from our community. Her eyes widened. Our community, you mean? I nodded. Many immigrants like us have been investing quietly for years. We see value where others don't because we've had to. In the coming weeks, Vertex Technologies underwent a transformation. We implemented a flatter management structure, redirected funds from excessive executive compensation to R&D, and launched an employee stock ownership program giving everyone from developers to, yes, janitorial staff, a direct stake in the company's success. Most meaningfully, we established the Visible Innovation Program, creating dedicated channels for employees at all levels to contribute ideas. The program's motto, Brilliance has no job title. 6 months later, Vertex released its most significant software update in years, incorporating several features developed by previously overlooked employees. Customer satisfaction scores began to climb. The stock price, stagnant for so long, rose 47% in the first quarter after the changes. As for me, I maintained my position as chairman of the board, but declined any executive role. My strength was in observation and long-term thinking, not day-to-day management. Dr. Chen excelled as CEO, bringing technical excellence and human understanding to the role. I still live in the same modest home, though I've paid off the mortgage. I drive the same 10-year-old car. Old habits of frugality die hard, and I've learned that true wealth isn't about displaying status, but about creating security and opportunity. Warner, I heard, took a position with a smaller competitor at half his previous salary. Thompson started a consulting business that struggled to attract clients. Several other former executives reached out about returning to Vertex, suddenly remembering my invaluable contributions to company culture. 1 year after the shareholders' meeting, we held a company-wide celebration of Vertex revitalization. Standing on the stage looking out at employees from every department and level, I shared the lesson that had guided my journey. Success isn't about who speaks the loudest or sits in the biggest office, I told them. It's about who observes the most carefully, who invests not just money, but time and attention most wisely, and who recognizes value where others see only function. After the applause died down, a young woman from the maintenance staff approached me hesitantly. Mr. Reyes, your story has inspired me, she said. I'm studying computer science at night, but I wasn't going to tell anyone here because," she trailed off, "because you were afraid they'd only see your uniform, not your potential." I finished for her. She nodded. "What's your name?" I asked. "Gabriela Diaz," I smiled. "Well, Gabriela Diaz, I look forward to seeing your application to our developer internship program. And in the meantime, I suggest you start investing in the company, even if it's just a small amount at first." She looked surprised. "You think that's a good idea?" "The best investors," I told her, "are those who see the company from angles others miss. And sometimes the most valuable perspective is from the ground up." As she walked away with new confidence in her step, I thought about how much had changed in a year. Vertex Technologies was thriving not because I had taken control, but because we had finally tapped into the full potential of everyone who worked there, recognizing that brilliance, ambition, and insight can be found at every level of an organization, often hiding in plain sight. The executives had laughed at the janitor investor with his pathetic holdings. They never realized that while they were focused on their quarterly bonuses in corner offices, I was building something far more meaningful. A coalition of overlooked people who recognize value where others saw none. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one making the most noise, but the quiet one observing from the corner. Perhaps even the one emptying the trash bins after everyone else has gone home.